To start with, I want to define three terms. The first is MVP, or more precisely, minimum viable product. The second is game as a service, which refers to the concept of selling a minimum viable product and then building upon it over time with subsequent monetization. And the third is closer. Within the games industry, a closer is someone tasked with entering the development process around 6 months to a year before release and cutting down the project to its MVP form while ensuring it will be packaged and shipped on the desired launch day. The reason for this video is rather simple. Games as a service are a plague. They are a scourge upon the world of AAA games, and most sentient players will likely already know this, but there are still those that defend this practice as if it is some benevolent gift to all players, and in some twisted reality of their own, believe that silencing those who speak out against the current games industry trajectory is somehow anything other than abhorrent ignorance. In a corporate world where moral and ethical guidelines were rigid and unflinching, the games as a service model might work fine, but here's the thing.
Gosh, you're right. How will we ever make the Fortune 500 list of the most moral companies? Oh, wait. They don't have that.
Basically, we don't live in that world. Every single decision a large company makes is driven by progressive bottom line enhancements and has absolutely nothing to do with upholding any sort of moral values. The idea that a game as a service could be a good thing is legitimate. The expectation or hope that it actually is or ever will be is unbelievably naive. When it comes to a game as a service, there is a close-knit relationship that exists between the concept of minimum viable product and initial launch. We don't need to go back very far to irrefutably prove this. Think about the original Destiny. Though not a letter-for-letter example of current industry normative games as a service projects, since it did have subsequent DLC price tags, it still has striking parallels to current events and trends, which I will dive into later on. It certainly had its positives and negatives, but no one will dispute the classic signs of games as a service architecture being present, exemplified by extremely bare-bones initial product content with progressive updates afterwards. How about another example? Everyone's favorite, Fallout 76. Fallout 76 is the absolute epitome of minimum viable product. Not to mention false advertising, but that's a topic for a different day completely. The game shipped as a patchwork sandbox of garbage with the sole purpose of monetizing as hard as possible and drip feeding enough content to keep players interested and, more importantly, keep them paying over a long period of time. As if this was not already a perfectly clear timeline, how about Destiny 2? The original Destiny spent years building up to an acceptable, even admirable state, and then they trashed it all and started over from an even weaker position because games as a service and 10-year plan, yay. Now for one final example, because this one is all the rage right now and probably the best indicator of a perfect instance where the minimum viable product model in partnership with a game as a service has been put to the test. Anthem. What a ride it's already been. This 6-year brainchild of EA and BioWare, built to capitalize on the looter-shooter genre and boasting an ill-conceived 10-year plan already, is fast becoming the quintessential example of everything wrong with the games as a service plague. A lot of people may be thinking, well, all you did was list examples of bad releases and some of those have since gotten much better over time. And that's true. Games like Destiny, even Destiny 2, now have improved. Fallout 76, in my eyes, has only shifted sideways while mired in controversy, but who knows? For those desperate to defend it with a hopeful and forward-looking sense of optimism, fine, whatever. There are even those who are already biting at the chain to defend Anthem. It honestly reeks of a mental deficiency if you ask me, but fuck it, what do I know? I'm just a toxic YouTuber. Maybe they're right. Sadly, no, they're not right, because if you take even just a few minutes to research any of these titles, you will uncover the true meaning of a minimum viable product game as a service. The core premise is cut content and reused assets. In an ideal scenario, these minimum viable abominations would launch in a more well-rounded state, and then the money generated could fund further content. That is the advertised model, after all. But the reality is that these games are launching with a massive chunk of their further content already made, already developed, but simply cut straight out of the initial release and held on a back burner while they launch a deficient and severely handicapped product. The problem is, when something like that occurs, there are fragments that always fall through the cracks. For Destiny and Destiny 2, there are direct links between a giant piece of cut content on Mars and the Warmind DLC. Characters in Destiny 2 often seem like they do not know the player, despite the events coming long after the initial timeline in Destiny 1, the original game. The reason for this is quite simple. It is content from the original game that was chopped out and sold later down the line as an independent DLC in the damn sequel. This is not an isolated incident. There is cut content present from the previous Curse of Osiris DLC as well, and all the way back to the original game we can see material fully made and put forward in multiple different trailers, but siphoned off to be sold later down the line for its own price tag. This does diverge from the current games as a service branding, since the new buzzwords are free DLC or whatever else. Hell, Battlefield 5 even had a chat filter that blocked players from even typing DLC unless they specifically said free first, because EA made damn sure to force everyone to properly praise them for their oh so benevolent and player-friendly move. Yeah, that actually happened. When we shift gears and look at Fallout 76, well, do I really even need to say more on that one? They are selling microtransactions of hairstyles that were free in Fallout 4. Everything is reused, obviously. They didn't even bother cleaning up the code, and there are still references to Skyrim and dragons all over the Fallout 76 infrastructure. It's a shallow game as a service, minimum viable product that is built off of old and unchanged material. Not to mention the fact it also screws with the lore continuity if you pay attention at all. Like, among many other things, how are there super mutants? They shouldn't exist yet. They couldn't even be bothered to craft a game that fit within their own universe, because again, minimum viable product, and crafting a clever narrative and concept that follows existing canon rule sets is not minimum, it requires work. Now onwards to Anthem. Anthem is showing the exact same signs as Destiny. As if to perfectly outline the idea of cut content while shipping a minimum version, there was a moment during one of the developer live streams where they scroll through the customization menus. In those menus, we see a ton of emotes, a bunch of different fabric and metal materials, multiple aesthetic armor pieces, and more, but almost none of that content is present in the actual Anthem release. Another problematic sign is the continuity of Anthem's story. In the Tyrant Mine mission, playable within the first couple hours of starting, you converse with a character that you simply don't know. In fact, you only actually meet that character formally when you complete a different stronghold that only becomes available after beating the entire game. Another character, heard guiding players in free play, is having perfectly normal conversations as if everyone is friends, long before you ever actually meet her. And there are a myriad of other examples that show clearly just how butchered this game is. And I don't mean butchered as in badly executed, though that is also true. I mean butchered as in blatantly chopped apart so as to be able to ship a minimum viable product. Here's the thing though, these games were not written into existence with the intention of lobotomizing them from the start. They were written and developed early on by a group of likely very creative, passionate, and probably underpaid workers who love what they do and wanted to reach for the stars. As the years unfold, however, they build some of this and some of that, achieve some things and fail at others, and craft a creation that, well, it might be good, but the public never gets to find out, because here come the closers. Now, because of my abrasive and combative attitude, I don't have many friends in the publishing space. I probably only have enemies, if we're being honest. Oopsie, whatever, I'm not sorry about it. But I do have some friends in the development scene, a couple of whom are actually at a very high level. I don't want to betray their confidence because they probably should not be talking to me at all, but in a conversation with one of them, I learned much more about the impact of these closers and how powerful they really are. My source often watches some of my videos, so if you see this one, what's up? Hope it's okay that I talked about this. Not trying to get you in trouble, but really wanted to reference it because it's quite interesting and I learned a lot. Essentially, the closers come in and force the development team to simplify the project, often to an extreme, an uncomfortable extreme. My personal speculation was that Anthem was rebooted 2 or so years before launch, but the likely scenario is that there was no hard reboot, rather a closing team came in 6 months or a year before final release day and told BioWare to throw their plans out the window, scrap a large chunk of their ambitions, and no matter what the state, the desire, or the plan, they kicked the game into submission to make it shippable and chopped out a bunch of material for further updates along the way. Games as a service are a plague, not because of their basic concept, but because of the execution and tactics employed to make them more profitable. A game that is intended to be a live service, overseen during its final months of development by an aggressive, cost-oriented, and profit-driven closing team, inevitably launches as a minimum viable product, or MVP, in a race to the bottom as gamers become increasingly tired of buying $60 games only to look down the barrel of a many-month waiting period before the game is even close to complete, even though they already paid full price. When considering all the best titles in the entire industry over the past few years, the names that are widely regarded as beautiful, successful, and deserving of praise from start to finish, None of them are games as a service, and honestly, none of them ever will be, because on an indispensable level, they are designed in order to be just good enough not to fail. I challenge anyone out there to defend the idea of purchasing something that is completely unfinished. It is a practice that barely exists outside of the software industry and would be entirely inconceivable in any normal retail market. The closest comparison I can think of is the snake oil salesman of old, peddling miracle tonic and advertising the world, but when you fork over the money, it's just not what was promised. Perhaps the miracle tonic might work better in 6 months or a year, but by that time, who's to say if you will even need it, want it, or have a use for it? So you have now purchased something that may end up being of no value to you later down the line, and the same is true of these live service games. The industrial hype concept is a very real thing. The entire gaming industry has fine-tuned an ability to play on gamers' excitement in a self-fueled cycle of heightened anticipation up till and just long enough after release day to skyrocket their sales numbers. This is a systemic practice built on predatory bottom-line tactics and years of degradation as the landscape has shifted from physical to digital to half-finished digital to whatever comes next. My glass half empty mentality isn't going anywhere. Reason being, when I warn against problematic industry norms or highlight criticism within a specific game, it informs players in a way that gives them a more complete view of how they wish to proceed. If I say this game is bad, it has this problem and blah blah, this, that, and the other, players will be skeptical and perhaps not buy it. But if they do still want to buy it, which I'm sure is often the case, they will likely seek out alternative sources of information, and eventually, after more research, they will land on a decision that runs in contrast to the tone of my videos, but they will be very well informed if they get to that point. However, if I hype up games, if I succumb to the fundamentally destructive mindset of if you don't have anything positive to say, don't say anything at all, then I will, beyond the shadow of a doubt, spur some players and viewers to purchase something solely based on me telling them to do so. And if that purchase ends up being, for any reason, unsatisfactory, I have harmed them. That is a product that they don't like, purchased directly under my advice, with funds they cannot get back, and cannot subsequently spend somewhere else that might be better served. If you don't like my tone, click the goddamn unsubscribe button. I don't exist to reinforce self-detrimental false positivity narratives when the reality of the games industry right now is something far less naive and ultimately in need of drastic change. Games certainly exist that exceed any and all expectation, but they are few and far between. It is euphoric to play, cover, and support a game that excels beyond prediction, but you can't manufacture that kind of content. It must be based on deserving products, which right now are like diamonds in a coal mine. But that's it. Essentially, the games as a service model in its entirety is a plague on the industry because it creates minimum viable products after the initial and ambitious project is dissected like a frog in high school biology under the supervision of a ruthless closing team who lack all consideration for artistic vision and creative process. Enough for today though. If you want to support the channel, there are a bunch of links down below, social communities, merchandise, and other things too, but that's enough. I'll cut it there and I'll stop rambling. Thank you all for watching, and have a nice night.